Hello. Thank you for your nice introduction. So next topic is safety reporting in clinical trials and compensation issues. By now we have been all oriented about these issues and some questions have been raised in the previous sessions. So I will touch upon some points and I will mug up this presentation within 20-25 minutes. So actually this issue is this safety issues in a clinical trial is a concerned topic has been perceived by different stakeholders in different arenas, not only the persons involved in the clinical trials, but also by the lay press. As it has been seen in the Times magazine, it has been published that they are concerned about this use of human volunteers in the clinical trials, and they have mentioned a caption about the participants in the clinical trial as human guinea pigs. So and this is also another media capture where the infamous elephant man drug trial, the trial which I have been mentioned in my previous presentation, is that monoclonal antibody in phase 0 clinical trial. This particular clinical trial led to the introduction of phase 0 microdosing clinical trial. In fact, what is that trial? Why is it called as elephant man? Because this trial, this TGN 1412 trial, that is a monoclonal antibody, and this monoclonal antibody was being used for the development of some musculoskeletal disorders, so connective tissue disorders like rheumatoid arthritis. And this was a monoclonal antibody. This was tested in the phase 1 clinical trial. You see here, these are the healthy human volunteers. Around 12 healthy human volunteers have participated in that trial, and the trial has been taken place in the UK, United Kingdom, in London, St. Mary's Hospital in London, and that was a very good infrastructure, and that's why, and the trial was conducted with elaborate informed consent. And that's why the people who have participated in the phase 1 clinical trial as healthy volunteers, they all knew about the possibility of this kind of acute hypersensitivity reactions. And in fact, out of these 12 participants, the 6 participants have been receiving this TGN 1412, and the problem was that all of the 6 participants received that medication in the same time. So that was the fault in the designing, and actually, out of these 6 participants, all the participants developed this kind of anaphylactic reactions. Maybe some may be severe, some mild to moderate. But you see here in these patients, in the subject, they developed acute cytokine storm. This led to the gangrene of the tip of the fingers and led to the necrosis of the and loss of the tip of fingers. And so this has a result. This is a result of that kind of trial, and immediately that trial was suspended. All of the subjects were recovered, but that led to introduction of that microdosing schedule. That is a minimum dose, that is 100 dose that is to be used in the phase 1 clinical trial. That should be initially injected into these healthy volunteers and not in a single go, one after another. That is a new introduction of that designing of the clinical trial. The microdosing technique has been introduced after this kind of clinical trial. So you see that is not uncommon. The serious adverse drug reactions are not an uncommon issue. This happens. Maybe rare, but it happens. And once it happens, it may be fatal enough to capture a life of a trial subject. So here in India also, the situation is not different. In fact, we all are conversant about the use of human papillomavirus vaccines. But when it was introduced in a clinical trial way back in 2010-11, and then during that time, actually the way the vaccine was tested in India, that was with utmost illogical and unethical way, because the trial participants were the school children and no informed consent was taken, and the permission was taken from the head of the institute. And so naturally 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe up to the level of 5 children suffered some fatality, like maybe some of them died during that clinical trial, but subsequently it was proved that none of this death was associated with the vaccine. I mean, some died due to the snake bite, some died due to the accidental drowning, etc. But as this happened during the clinical trial, and that trial was not done following the proper informed consent, so a huge uproar was there in the lay press, and with the conduct of several such kind of unethical clinical trial reports, some public interest litigation was filed before the Supreme Court, and on the Honorable Supreme Court and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India then was compelled to establish an apex committee and technical committee to supervise the clinical trials of new chemical entity conducted in India. And out of that report, in 2013, new directives came in the drugs and cosmetic rules in India. And actually, you can remember that during that period there was a temporary stoppage of all the clinical trials in India. And that there was a halt. But afterwards, whenever these drugs and cosmetic rules revised has been published, then afterwards these clinical trials are coming, and now after the introduction of the NDCTR, all the process of doing a ethical clinical trial has been established, and so now we are very much conversant in conducting the ethical clinical trials in India. So what is clinical trial? I'm not going into the detail as because it has been mentioned earlier by the speakers, but so the safety monitoring is a part and parcel of a clinical trial. So whatever action involves a risk, that should be monitored and critically monitored. So clinical trial without ensuring the patient safety is extremely unethical. So science cannot be above the human safety. That should be borne in mind. So when this safety monitoring starts and how long it continues. So it starts from the phase 1 to phase 4, just rightly said, that's womb to tomb and from range to bedside, because safety monitoring doesn't involve only the human beings. The safety monitoring starts from the preclinical studies as well. In fact, during the conduct of the clinical trials, whenever a new signal comes, the investigators, the sponsor is compelled by the regulatory authority to do an elaborate preclinical safety analysis involving the preclinical animal studies, in vitro studies, and so to find out the mechanism, to elaborate this mechanistic point of view of this of the underlying mechanism of this signal. So this really, it can be truly said that it spans between the preclinical to the clinical stage of the drug development. So general belief is that efficacy data is the primary focus of a trial. Yes, we are concerned about the same. We need efficacy as good efficacy as the drug, but simultaneously safety issues perhaps the most important for the the efficacy data, because the safety issues has a power to stop a trial, as it has been already known that many drugs we have seen in the last decade that after successful launch in the market and used for several years, those drugs have been withdrawn and from the market, like rofecoxib, valdecoxib, estimazole, and cisapride, rimonabant, so many and so forth. So whose responsibility is the safety? Whose responsibility is responsibility of all stakeholders, like starting from the sponsors, from the regulatory authorities, from the investigators, the institutional ethics committee, yes, and moreover the patients, because patients are the cornerstone in the safety issues. This is the first person to observe that any untoward medical reaction occurring in him or her. So is the person or she is the person to communicate with the investigator first. So the patient is also the cornerstone among these safety assessment and safety identification, safety issues, the adverse drug reaction identification. So clinical trial different phases I have already discussed. I am not going into the detail. So the phase 1 to phase 4. Now I'm going to the definition of adverse drug reaction. All the noxious and unintended response to a medicinal product related to any dose should be considered as an adverse drug reaction in clinical trial. It is ICH E6 definition, as mentioned by Professor Rajra, that ICH E6, this deals with the clinical trial regulations. So why it's called any dose? Just try to remember, try to understand, because in the phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials, the dose has not been fixed, finalized. I have discussed in my previous presentation that in phase 2 clinical trial is the dose finding study. So naturally, when the dose is not finalized, so it can happen to any dose. So, but in case of the adverse drug reaction in a post-marketed product, like pharmacovigilance studies, whatever we are doing, we are collecting the data here. So that is usually that at doses normally used in a man, that is marketed medicinal products. So in case of marketed medicinal products, in case of pharmacovigilance, that is in post-marketed product, in case situation, it is at a normally used dosage. But in case of clinical trial, it can happen to any dose. So at any dose, if any adverse noxious and unintended reaction happens, that is called an adverse drug reaction. Now this adverse event. So adverse drug reaction when there is a causality, plausible causality relationship. But when the adverse event is that any untoward medical occurrence in a patient or clinical investigation in a subject administered a pharmaceutical product, and that does not necessarily have a causal relationship. So causal relationship, unless and until it is being established, the drug and the adverse outcome is termed as an adverse event. Say, for example, a patient is under a clinical trial. He comes to the trial site by bus or whatever vehicle is being used, and on the way, he has suffered a road traffic accident. And he has sustained admission in a hospital, nearby hospital. And he has informed the investigator, yes, sir, I have got a road traffic accident and have been admitted with a fractured femur. So what is this? It is an adverse event, because that should be recorded in your protocol as an adverse event. But after going into the detail of this causality, when you will never find that is a causally related with the investigational product. So it is not an adverse drug reaction per se, as it is not causally related, but it's an adverse event, as because in this untoward medical occurrence occurs in a patient who is under clinical trial, but that does not necessarily have a causal relationship with this drug. Okay, so adverse events can be unfavorable or unintended sign. It's clinically significant symptom or disease, maybe hypersensitivity reaction, or maybe in the form of abnormal laboratory investigations parameter. So you can see it, in this picture that is a bullseye is the adverse drug reaction. The surrounding circle is the suspected adverse drug reaction, but outer ellipse is the adverse event. So adverse event comprises of all the untoward reactions, but whenever the causality is established, if the bull hits the bullseye, it is the adverse drug reaction. So now the classification of adverse events, it can be classified according to severity, according to seriousness, according to expectedness, and according to causality. So you can see the severity and seriousness, you need to differentiate between these two, as because there is a specific connotation as a serious adverse event. And the serious adverse event has a specific connotation and specific impact in a clinical trial. So the severity wise, it can be classified in mild, moderate, severe, and in case of under the seriousness category, it can be categorized as non-serious or serious. So how is different? What is more important or more impact in a clinical trial? What is your impression? Is it serious or severe? Which one is more important in clinical trial? Anybody? It is serious one. The severe one, the patient might be having intense headache, but maybe due to an acute attack of migraine. Okay. But the patient simultaneously, another patient might be having severe headache that may be due to a CVA. So you need to assess the patient, you need to diagnose the patient what is the cause. So if it is a cause which doesn't need the admission of the patient or does not need any organ dysfunction, so in that case, it may not be serious enough. Okay, or otherwise a mild or moderate symptom may be serious enough if this is in the form of acute myocardial infarction. So that you need to assess, and that is under the discretion of an investigator. An astute physician, astute investigator will differentiate between the severity and seriousness of a patient who is undergoing a clinical trial. So he will consider after his diagnosis the adverse drug reaction, he will define the patient as a serious or non-serious, though the symptom is severe enough. So what is a serious adverse event? Clinically, they include any untoward medical occurrence that occur at any dose. Mind it, in clinical trial that can occur at any dose. Not the marketed, it is not a marketed product that is usually used a normal dose. So in clinical trial that can occur at any dose, results in death or life-threatening or requires inpatient hospitalization or prolongs the existing hospitalization, results in persistent or significant disability or incapacity, or is a congenital pneumonia or birth defect. This is the ICH definition. So what you do after the ICH is diagnosed, you should intake that information, you should investigate whether it is a serious or non-serious, then integrate all these or collate all these informations, and then inform. Whom to inform? You should inform, already we have discussed, you should inform the licensing authority, that is DCGI. You should inform the local authority, that is EC, ethics committee. You should inform the sponsor, who is the stakeholder, one of the important stakeholder of the clinical trial. So many stakeholders are there, and you have to inform them accordingly. And these data, I mean, there is a form, that is the data elements which I need to capture here while filling up this form, starting from the patient details like gender, age, weight, height, suspected drugs, generic name of the drug, indications for which it was this suspected drug was prescribed, dosage and strength, daily dose and regimen, route of administration, starting date and time and stopping date and time, other treatments, that is concomitant medications, and details of the serious adverse events. So this is the form. You have to fill it up, and you should submit it in using the Sugam portal. This is a Sugam portal. You have to click it, the button, right button, and you will, this type of page will come up. You have to enter all these elements there. This is online presentation, online submission, and after submitting all these elements, then it is whenever you will click the button, then you will say that SAE 14-day report is submitted by the sponsor. The sponsor is responsibility he will do on behalf of the investigator. So SAE reporting, all protocols must have the following informations while reporting this SAE, because I have said this is the primary responsibility of the lies with the patient. If the patient doesn't have your contact information, he might not be in touch with you. So the contact person, sponsors representative for the SAE reporting, and how is the time frame, treatment of a cost, treatment of cost coverage, how relatedness of an AE will be assessed. All these informations will be there in the protocol to help the patients and the investigator to go up with this, to move forward with this SAE reporting. Now, SAE follow-up, all the SAE must be followed until the outcome of the event is recovered, or the recovered with sequelae or without sequelae, or be fatal, or until the all queries are resolved. So the SAE may be recovered without sequelae, or maybe recovered with sequelae, or maybe fatal enough to culminate into death. So what is the this is the timeline, and the persons to be informed according to timeline. So whenever the SAE occurs, within 24 hours of SAE occurrence, that is this investigator should inform the sponsor, chairman of the EC, and DCGI. So after there is a time gap of 14 days. It is the previous publication. Now it has been changed. I have told you in the last presentation that instead of occurrence, it has been mentioned that within 14 days of SAE, knowledge of SAE, there is awareness. So whenever it is being informed to the investigator, from the point of that time, there is a 14-day window, and during that time, you have got enough time. There's 14 days. You have to collect all this data. You have to investigate. You have to examine, and you have to make a detailed analysis report, and you have to submit it to the chairman of the IC, this head of the institution, DCGI, and it is the obligation of the sponsor to do it on your behalf. So then the chairman of EC, that is this committee, will submit it to the DCGI. So within 30 days of receiving the SAE report. So the SAE report, once it is received from the sponsor to the EC, chairman of the EC, it's the duty of the chairman of the EC, responsibility of the chairman of the EC to submit it to the DCGI with its report, with its analysis report, that analyzed report with compensation and recommendation within 30 days of receipt of this initial report. Then the DCGI will frame an apex committee or expert committee, which I have already mentioned, that the chairman of the apex committee, then it's their responsibility, the recommendation on compensation within 60 days of receipt of the SAE report. So then after the DCGI receives that report, they will, within 90 days of receipt of the report, they will direct the sponsor, if it is causally related, or there is a compensation that is to be established or recommended by the expert committee, to provide it to pay the patient or its relative within 30 days of receipt of that order. So on the medical management and compensation for injury or death relating to the biomedical health services, how this compensation will be calculated, and who are the stakeholders. So this is the overseen by the ethics committee for the biomedical health research, because I've already mentioned, in case of the biomedical health research, this is the responsibility of the ethics committee, and whenever there is a sponsored clinical trial, it can be also done by the ethics committee, but that should be substantiated with the central licensing authority. So compensation formula. There is a compensation formula in case of death. This is this clinical trial death. This is B into F into R. B is the base amount. The base amount has been fixed. It's around 8 lakhs. F is the factor depending on the age of the trial subject as per the Annexure 1, that is Workmen Compensation Act. I will show you the Annexure 1 later on. So this depends. This varies according to the age. If the age of the trial participant is lower, so the F factor is higher. So and the age as it advances, the factor becomes lower. So B into F, then R. R is the risk factor. Risk factor between a scale of 0.5 to 4 as under. It also varies according to the inherent medical condition of the patient. If the patient is terminally ill, then the factor, the risk factor is very low. There is 0.5. But if it is a healthy volunteer, in case of phase 1 clinical trial, the risk factor is highest in the tune of 4. But it is a patient with moderate risk, the risk factor is 2. So if the patient is with mild risk, the risk factor is 3. In this way, it happens. So however, in case of patients whose expected mortality is 90% or more within 30 days, a fixed amount of 2 lakhs should be given. This has been fixed. So you need not to calculate the compensation. Whatever value comes, the basic amount, the 2 lakhs should be provided to those patients whose expected mortality rate is more than 90%, 90% or more within 30 days. So at least 2 lakhs rupees will be received by them. This happens in case of the cancer clinical trials. Usually the terminally ill cancer patients, when there is no options are available, they often take part in a clinical trial with with any option if available. So in that case, the 2 lakhs will be given to them or their relative. Formula in case of clinical trial related injury other than death, that is C into D into 90 divided by 100 into 100. Here D is the percentage disability in the trial subject has occurred. So D is the percentage disability that has to be calculated. C is the quantum of compensation which would have been given in case of the death of the trial subject. So C is the if the quantum of compensation in case of the death of the trial subject, you have to calculate it beforehand, and then the percentage of disability that is to be presumed in the particular due to the particular SAE into 90 by divided by 100 into 100. Situations: a permanent disability, congenital birth defect, stillbirth, early death due to anomaly, etc. And now the compensation in such cases should be a lump sum amount. The disability, in case of disability, it will be a lump sum amount, should be kept as a fixed deposit to bring a monthly interest. And in case of birth defect leading to no death but deformity, then which can be fully corrected, that should be, the patient should be provided with a free medical treatment as long as he required. Even if it is lifelong, the sponsor should be at the cost of this free medical treatment over and above the compensation for this permanent disability. Okay. So now the clinical trial related SAE causing the life-threatening disease. So one is death, one is permanent disability, and another is a life-threatening, chronic life-threatening disease and reversible SAE. So in that case, the compensation amount is lower. There is 2 into W into N, where W is the minimum wage per day for the unskilled worker in Delhi. Why Delhi? Because this Delhi is our capital, so it has been taken into cognizance. In number of days of hospitalization. And why 2? Because to cover up the loss of wages for the attendant. The attendant means who brings the patient to the hospital, who accompanies the hospital. His wage is lost. So that to compensate that loss of wages, 2 is being given, not 1. So now this is the Annexure 1, which I have already mentioned. That is the factor for the age. That is, you see here for the age 16, it is maximum 228. For the age 47, it is 163. Okay, so it varies according to the age. So remember, last point is that there are no safe biologically active drugs. There are only safe physicians. And here you see the another participant on that infamous Elephant Man clinical trial. He was the healthy volunteer. He was the person who received the placebo. He was the witness of all these incidents, and he was been mostly interviewed by the daily press and the Sun, and he was standing in front of the St. Mark's Hospital where he was being interviewed. He is the Mr. Raste Khan. So thank you very much.